probably getting tired out from the last 2 days of a lot of lectures, so we hope we can keep you awake this afternoon. Hope you've gotten some coffee and tea outside. We're going to just start with a few housekeeping points. If I can get the first slide. As you've probably seen, there's a courtyard outside, so if there's any emergency, you can head out there. The restrooms are to the left and to the left. And please put your phones on silent mode and take important calls outside. Also, this is being recorded, and it will be shared on DevAsia, the DevAsia website, and I think on YouTube as well, so I hope you're all okay with that. And I would like to call up our speaker, Ricky Barba. He is the Director for the South Asia Operations Services in the Office of Safeguards.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everyone. I think I'll ask, if you don't mind, those who are particularly in the back, maybe you want to move forward. There's also going to be group discussion, so you don't want to be in a table without a group because that makes you the presenter immediately. No, I'm kidding. You're not presenting anything, but there will be some discussions within the group. So I hope you choose, a table with at least a group mate or two. Okay, so thank you very much. So I think all of you have been participating in the BOF. So we've had that over the few days. I hope you've gone to our booth in the process of attending the BOF, and so you may have already had some information about the new environmental and social framework. We have information at the back. The QR codes are all at the back. If you haven't gotten your mouse pad or your standee, please, there are more materials with Mikey in the back. So I'm happy to be here, and we are grateful for your interest that you came to the Safeguard sessions. I know many of the people attending the BOF don't necessarily deal with safeguards, but I think this is an important year to understand safeguards if you're not directly involved in safeguards, because we are rolling out the ESF, and that will be effective on January 1st, 2026, next year. So all projects will feature the ESF. So if you are a consultant, a contractor, an NGO involved in a project, then it's important that you understand ESF. ESF is how we ensure that inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development is achieved, and that's the goal of ADB. So just to introduce myself, I'm a director for South Asia. So I work on India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. So if any of you are working in that area, feel free to get in touch with me. Beatrice is another director working specifically on private sector, the complex private sector projects, because we also deal with the less complex private sector projects, as well as Pacific operations, so all the Pacific Islands. We do have two other directors, one handling Central West and East Asia, as well as one handling Southeast Asia. All of that is in the QR codes in our website showing you the organization. But I'm not here to talk about the organization. What you've come to attend is a series of modules. Do we have the schedule? I'm sure you have the schedule. So these are modules on the value proposition. I won't read it out. So there are 5 modules that will be discussed today. And what's important is that we'll invite you to have a group session, and that's why I ask for those of you who are alone in a table, it would be better if you're in a different table so that there can be a group discussion. So because what we want to do is after all the modules are presented, we'd like you to basically have discussions on your key takeaways, raise unresolved questions, and help shape future learning opportunities. So we have been doing this, particularly with procurement and consulting, because safeguards is inevitably part and parcel of that, but this is a new year forward in 2026, so we want to understand how we can also improve learning opportunities. Because safeguards is evolving, and it's not only about compliance, it's about building capacity, fostering accountability, and ensuring that our projects leave a positive legacy for communities and ecosystems. So everybody's role is vital in this respect. So again, thank you very much. For those who are not from Manila, welcome to the Philippines. We're happy to welcome you to the bank if this is your first time. And for those who are from here, magandang hapon sa inyong lahat, and I hope that this session is productive for everyone. Thank you. Lisa.
Thanks so much. So before we move forward, I just want to get an idea of who's in the room. Can you just raise your hand if you're with a consulting firm or you're an independent consultant? Okay, so most of you. Are there any civil contractors, construction contractors, civil works contractors? Oh, good. We have a few. All right. We were really hoping to get a lot of contractors, so we're happy to have you here. Anyone from the NGO sector or academe? One. Okay, great. So welcome. And we'll take a few questions at the end of each presenter, and then, like Ricky said at the end, we'll have some key takeaways. So there's some post-it notes on your table if you wanted to take some notes as we go along, or jot down questions as well. So we have a Mentimeter that I wanted to show. If the person in the back can get the Mentimeter up, great. We wanted to get some input from you on some of the key challenges you've faced in the projects that you've been working on, so that we can try to address those as we go today. And for those coming in, you can take a seat at the front so you can see the slides better. You can come to the front. Yeah, especially for this, join this woman here in the middle, so she's not alone in the middle. Great, thank you. Great, so we're just doing a Mentimeter. If you want to share some of the challenges you've faced related to safeguards, or what are your biggest concerns with thinking about environmental and social safeguards in ADB-funded projects? Right of way, that's a big one. Resettlement, pricing, delays. Yeah, we know a lot about delays. We'll be hearing more about that from some of our speakers. How can we reduce delays by doing things right in the first place? And having early engagement. That's one of the key takeaways, early engagement to prevent problems and delays. I'll give you that one already. So a few more. Consistency. That's a good one. We also struggle with consistently interpreting our policy and consistently applying our policy. Amongst 190, I think we have about 190 staff now in the Office of Safeguards, so getting everyone on the same page about how to interpret and implement our policy is one of our challenges. Good, a few more before we move on. For the newcomers, if you can share some of your challenges. Great, so I think we can move on to our first speaker. Beatrice, as Ricky mentioned, is Director for Pacific and Private Sector Operations, and she'll be talking to us about the new environmental and social framework. Can I also just get a raise of hands? Did anyone attend the session yesterday at 12:45 on the ESF where Beatrice spoke? A couple? So we tried not to duplicate too many of the slides. This is a little more technical, so I hope it's not too much of a repetition for you.
You might need to take a little bit of a nap if you were at the 5 minutes only. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so it's good to see some consultants in the room and also some CSO partners. You're usually the first people already getting involved in the project, helping the borrowers kind of design their projects, and it's nice that you know a little bit about the updates to our safeguards policy so you can communicate that when you're involved in the early planning of the projects. Also, with the contractors, you play a super vital role in the implementation of the framework and our requirements. So it's nice to see you here, so thank you so much. So our old policy was done in 2009, and it needed a little bit of a reframe, I guess, with emerging risk areas, alignment with other development banks, and just getting a little bit more guidance and structure to what we require, so it's communicated a little bit clearer. So our new policy was approved in November 2024, and it was taken to be effective January 1, 2026, so in a few more months. Any project that is approved for concept after January 1, 2026, our new policy will apply. So our new policy has a vision statement where we talk about what we want to attain and our objectives, and then we talk about a suite of mandatory sections in our policy, in our framework, where it has our policy, which is what we want to do. We have the standards where it makes it clear what the borrowers and clients are responsible for. And then we have specific requirements for different types of financing modalities and products. And then we have an updated prohibited investment list. Then we are working on updating our operations manuals and staff instructions, and these will include everything that's mandatory to be, the hard requirements of our new framework. And then we have non-mandatory guidance notes and tools and training, and this just supports our capacity building program and also gives best practices for how to implement the framework, but they're not mandatory. So why have we updated it, and what do you get out of it? So one of the big differences between our old policy and this new framework, the environmental and social framework, is that we are trying to be more risk-based in how we approach the due diligence process and the implementation, managing the risks in implementation. So for example, you have a project that has a moderate risk or low risk project. We can back end, so you can do some assessments maybe or some supplementary studies after approval, whereas now it's a hard requirement to do all of those before approval. So it gives a little bit of flexibility there. We also are more aligned now with the standards of the other MDBs. So World Bank has 10 standards, IFC has the performance standards, EBRD has the same, and so we now are more aligned. We now have a better language that's common between us, hopefully then limiting confusion for the borrowers and clients where we do co-lending. We also have a big difference now for high-risk projects and the disclosure requirements. So for Cat A projects in the old policy, we had a 120-day disclosure requirement prior to board, and now that's changed now for our high-risk projects under this framework. We have 120 days for sovereign projects and 60 days only for non-sovereign projects, which is a big thing for the people who support private sector projects. And then we also have the flexibility to apply borrowers' E&S systems if they're deemed to be materially consistent with our requirements. So we'd have to go through the assessment process. It can be standard by standard. It doesn't have to be the whole framework. And then if it's materially consistent, that lessens the work that needs to be done during due diligence. Great. So the other thing that's changed is how we categorize risk, but basically from the three focus areas in the old policy, environment, involuntary resettlement, and indigenous peoples, now we have one unified categorization, and it's now 4 levels to 4 tiers. So high risk, which used to be Cat A, low risk, which used to be Cat C, and now we have Cat B that's split into 2. So substantial risk and moderate risk. This just allows you and allows us to better plan our resources. The more risky the project, then the more resources you put in place. FI, for financial intermediary, we also have risk classifications. I think in the old one we only had 2, and now we have 3. And again, that's just to plan out how much effort you need to put in place for the assessment and the implementation of these kinds of projects. So there's not much, so it looks like there's a lot of changes, but actually a lot of our standards were already in the SBS. So we still have the same involuntary resettlement standard and the indigenous people standards that are, mapped out to SR2 and SR3 in our old policy. The environmental standard, which is SR1, has been split into 6 different ESSs now. So it just gives more guidance on how to do these different focus areas. Then we have 2 cross-cutting standards, which are around management systems, which we'll talk about later, and also grievance mechanisms and stakeholder engagement. So those are the 2 cross-cutting standards, which are 1 and 10. So here they are, and as I said, you have 10 cards there and mouse pads that Lisa's and Mikey has and Yanni has. So please grab some if oh, you already have some. Very good. You got the merch already. So some of the highlights and the differences that are now expanded in the new framework is that we now have a little bit more guidance about what constitutes project workers in a project and how then labor and working conditions apply to them. And this also includes workers that are down within the supply chain as well. And then we have focus areas now that were kind of not prominent in the old policy. So for example, where we have risks to sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. So that was usually covered under community health and safety and health and safety in the old policy. But now we mention it in a few standards, and it gives guidance on how to treat these because there's special sensitivities around these kind of incidents and risks. And then for cultural heritage, it just goes again into more detail about tangible and intangible cultural heritage, giving more guidance around it. That's not unlike what we already had before. It just gives us more detail in the framework and how do we then assess the risk and manage that risk. For biodiversity risks and impacts, we now have no-go areas where development shouldn't be. We will not support projects in these special areas, and these are internationally recognized areas that are particularly sensitive or have unique, globally important features. We also now not just have no net loss requirements for residual biodiversity impacts, but also require net gain for certain types of impacts. And we also have clear instructions on how to assess ecosystem services and how to maintain those benefits, and also promote the sustainable management and use of natural resources. And then lastly, on stakeholder engagement, it's the same, right? We have stakeholder engagement in the old plan, but now we have more emphasis on certain things, and that includes where your risk of reprisal is high. We should make sure that we have safe spaces for people to air their grievances, communicate their concerns, but in a safe manner. And then also we have emphasized a little bit about confidentiality and data privacy protocols. Then we have little notes about how to treat different kinds of financing modalities and products. So that's all in there just to give more guidance. What's our responsibility? What's the borrower's responsibility? And then we've updated the prohibited investment activities list, and now it's aligned with the energy policy. So we don't support projects, new coal-fired power generation or coal-fired heating plants. We don't support coal mining, processing, storage, or transportation. We do not support upstream or midstream oil projects or any projects dealing with natural gas exploration or drilling. We also prohibit financing the production, trade, and the use of asbestos fibers. So that does not exclude doing projects where you're demolishing a structure and there's asbestos in it. You would manage that risk. You could still do that. This last one about financing the production and trade and use of asbestos fibers doesn't exclude that. So at the moment, we're in the middle of our capacity building program, initial capacity building program, because there's going to be a rolling program going forward. And so we're doing this training with you guys, but we're also training in the DMCs. We have some training for private sector clients, and we have internal training as well for all of the staff. And then it comes into effect 1st of January, and then we'll keep going with our training and capacity building program as we roll out. Okay, So I think we did this already. Yep, but do you have any questions at this point? Okay, so the ESF, if you want to go to the website, that's the QR code. And then we'll have more speakers. We're going to talk about some of the key standards at the rest of the afternoon.
Any questions for Beatrice? Okay, it's very clear. Great, thank you. Thank you. So now I'm pleased to introduce Felix. He's a Principal Safeguard Specialist in the Office of Safeguards. He's going to be talking to us about sustainable procurement and safeguards.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and Ricky for that introductory comment as well. Procurement, I know you've been inundated with procurement the last 2 days for the Business Opportunities Fair. So we're going to talk about procurement, most of which I think you should know, and you would know if you've been here a couple of days earlier. But we're going to look at it through the lens of safeguards, and that's the only difference. So anything to do with procurement, I just walked across the other room and I saw the merit point criteria on the screen being talked about. So I assume a lot of you are aware about that already, but we're going to talk about procurement. And, you know, we've talked about all the policies. We talk about the policies, but all of these policies get actually implemented when you respond to bids. As a contractor, as consultants, you respond to bid, you get evaluated, and hopefully you win the bid. And then this is where actually the implementation of the policies starts. So I say it's difficult to come up with policy, but that's the most easiest part. The implementation of the policy is always the challenging part. And that's where you come in, okay? So together, let's walk through and see how our safeguards aspects could be managed effectively when we're implementing project. And we'll look at procurement very quickly, look at the mechanisms that we have. How do you could also put yourself in an advantageous position to make sure you're putting in responsive bids that reflect safeguards and you get evaluated accordingly. And ADB, we don't live alone. We're part of a multilateral development bank, or we call them IFIs or MFI, multilateral financing institutions. And together, we come out jointly to come out in a much more systematic way of doing things to ensure consistency. And that's why we're part of this framework. So you can see the African Development Bank there. You can see also IFAD, Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank, and the European Investment Bank. Our approach to and the framework for procurement are very similar. So if you've responded to any of these institutions before in terms of procurement, you will not find many dissimilarities between what we show you. I'll be going through a lot. I'm not going to, this is sustainable procurement and public procurement. This has to do with civil works. And it tells you where the leverages are in terms of the supplier level, the product and infrastructure level, and what will be expected of you. I think this is one of maybe best infographics that, yeah, if you want to take a snapshot, you can take a snapshot, because this is how ADB mainstreams environmental health and safety or environmental social management planning into our procurement process in our project cycle. So the various rings that you see are project cycle. On the very top end of it is what we call country partnership strategy, CPS stage. And this is where we agree with our borrowing countries, our 4-5-year strategy on the areas that we're going to work together. So we don't get up and say, okay, I want to borrow to do road, and it just happens. No, we would have already planned 4 or 5 years, and say Philippines government or Kazakhstan government will say, in the next 4 or 5 years, I want to develop my health sector. I want to develop my education sector. And those are the areas that our project teams will be engaging with the sector departments in those countries. Anything outside that strategy constitutes what we call an exception, which the Ministry of Finance would have to raise, and then it comes back to our board. So, but the actual development of project comes at the concept stage. What you see on the left-hand side, we'll be going through the arrow like that. And at that concept stage, that's where we develop what we call a project concept note. And this is where the very early entry stage of procurement happens. There are a lot of acronyms at the top, SPP, which is Strategic Procurement Planning. And Again, I'll be talking a lot about sustainable procurement or merit point criteria procurement. This is where we determine the evaluation criteria for the non-pricing element of the procurement. There isn't any fixed approach. We're taking a risk-based approach for some very low risk. When I say low risk here, I'm talking about procurement, infrastructure project. The weightings towards the MPC criteria may be lower, whereas some high-risk infrastructure project, those weightings may be higher accordingly to reflect the risk that is associated to it. So at the concept stage, we start to discuss that. And this is where we determine, even in current framework, whether the MPC or value-based procurement approach is applicable to the project or not. We're doing it, but from next year, it's going to be business as usual, okay? And then from there, we go ahead, we prepare all the safeguards document, and then it goes into the procurement process where we issue out requests for proposals, and that's the bidding stage. That's when you get notifications of the opportunities. That's why you're here. All of you here, Business Opportunities Fair, you're all looking for business. We're looking to give business, and I hope you win more businesses in the future. But this is where you respond to the bid for the RFP or RFQ, if that's the case. And in this case, I would always urge all of you, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a contractor, to look out now very carefully to the request for proposals, especially for what you will call the EHS, because we use that acronym, and that is where safeguard sits within. We all know how the language comes, environment, health, and safety, but it's very much encompassing everything safeguards, literally. So you should look out for that. Look at management plans that have been processed or developed by the project, because it will form part of your contract when you're implementing the project. If you don't see them and you don't budget for them, it means you're likely not to allocate resources for them during project implementation, construction, even if you're a consultant. And if you don't have the resource, you don't have the budget, construction firms, consultancy firms, we're not charitable organizations. You're here to make profit. Then it becomes quite very challenging when those requirements are made of you. This, for me, is the weakest link in the entire project cycle with procurement that we have in ADB. And that's an area where we're working internally in ADB to strengthen so that we can strengthen safeguards implementation on our project. If you go for bidders conference, please ask for safeguards management plans. They're going to be coming very, very, very strongly. Ask for them. And if they tell you we don't have any plans for it, then you should be asking the employer, who is going to be managing that? And would that be expected for me? And when it comes to the contract management stage, when they're drafting the contract, you have to make that also explicitly clear that does not fall under your jurisdiction, if that's not the case. Because we as borrowers, when we come on a project site, by default, the loan covenant or financing agreement, because it's not only loans we provide, let me use the word financing agreement, makes the environmental management plan a covenant for the transaction that we've issued. It's a standard schedule of our legal agreement, right? So we will come expecting that you are aware of the environmental and social management plans, and you are implementing them accordingly, and that's where it becomes very challenging, okay? So just make aware of that. So from here, we go to step 3, which is the bid evaluation report, BER, and we do not do the evaluation. We do not implement the procurement. I think this is something that needs to go very clear, if that wasn't made clear to you. But we have what we call a no objection request or privilege over the review report. We can only object or not object, and that's all we do. We look at the report, we look at the evaluation and see whether it's fair, transparent, consistent with our guidelines and regulations, and then based upon that we can say, okay, we don't object, and then it goes away. Then from there we go into the CMP, which is a contract management planning, and that's where the contract is signed. And then you go into your project implementation, lessons learned, reporting completion. So this is very important. In fact, this is one of the most, I would say, important infographics. Again, I'll be skipping some of the infographics and the tables because you have heard about them and you know about them. But feel free to raise your hand if you have any burning question. So we have standard bidding documents, and those standard bidding documents and what we call conditions of particular contract, COPA, are there to guide the borrower or to guide the client on how to implement the procurement process up to contract management. We'll be going through some of them very quickly just for you to know what are some of them, but I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of it. And also just to give you heads up, we shadow this more towards contractors. So what you see here is the sections for civil works and large civil works, not for consultancy. So if you're a consultancy, but if you're a consultant providing supervision service to a contract, then this should also be relevant to you because you should know what is in the contractor's contract. I'm going to move. Now, I'll focus also on this infographic, which is very important. And this one tells you at what level you have to now cascade the project level environmental management plan. These terminologies I'm using are fit for purpose for the SPS in its current form. From next year, we'll be talking about environmental and social management plan. I'm sure some of you are very much aware. But for now, we call it EMP. Now, at the top is what we prepare when we process the project. And at that time, you are not at the table. We're only talking to the borrower. Okay, we talk to the borrower, and then there are requirements that the borrower needs to meet. And then when we finish the safeguards instrument, it could be an environmental impact assessment. It could be what we call IEE, Initial Environmental Examination, and so many across the safeguards, RAP, Resettlement Action Planning, or Land Acquisition Planning, or Indigenous People Planning. Then we disclose them. You are not at the table at this stage. You only come at the table when you've signed up, when you respond to the bid, and then you sign up to the contract. And by that time, it's expected of you to translate the project level management plans into site-specific management plans. That's your responsibility, okay? Those plans are not just actions. They have also resource implications. It may require that you deploy a particular expertise at a particular stage of the project for managing those plans. So that's why if you're not familiar with this, it's better you hire a consultant to take a look at this and make sure you respond accordingly and make sure the resource that you need have been budgeted for. No BOQ items for these resources means implementation challenges for you. And it's going to hit into your profit quite very hard. I don't think you want to be doing that. So that's what you see there. Yeah, this already I think I've talked about the bids, what goes in, but then in our standard bidding document, you have to submit your technical and financial proposals. The technicals will be reviewed first, and then we'll look into it, and then before then the financials. There's qualification criteria, then we'll go through the evaluation criteria, and then we'll look into some of the bid forms. Not much into the contract document, but I can tell you some templates that we can share, and you can take a look. So we're going to go, what does our standard bidding document, SBDs, look like? And we will touch in some of the sections just to tell you what is the new requirement. And I know you've heard all of this. So I'm going to be whipping through, but I know you've heard them because I've been to some of the meetings the last 2 days. I've also talked a lot about this. Under FIDIC arrangement, we tend to use the word environmental health and safety management. That's FIDIC. And most of you here that have implemented, if you're a consultant that have acted as a supervision consultant or your contractor that have implemented, you will be familiar with the FIDIC provisions. It's EHS, but then it also includes every management plan. And just for consistency globally, we've adopted a terminology, EHS. It doesn't just focus on just health and safety. There's environment and there's social element to it as well. Qualification. I would say going forward now, please take a very good look at your qualification in terms of the personnel that are requested of you. For environmental health and safety, we are looking for someone who is competent. Competency is a combination of qualified and also experience. So someone who has a PhD in environmental impact assessment but has 0 years of practice isn't necessarily competent. That's the way we look at it. So there's a combination of qualification and also experience. That's the competency that comes in there. And you should respond accordingly. A lot of the questions that I get asked here a lot is that, okay, sometimes we ask of international organization membership, but please note there's always a footnote that says a local equivalent. So it doesn't mean that if your particular system isn't ISO certified, then you'll be disadvantaged. You quite very much are free to put in your local qualification if you have that membership as well. There are specific criteria that needs to be looked. It's the same qualification, so I'm just going to be whipping through it. And I've talked about the ISO and the national equivalent as well, which you can demonstrate. It's same about qualification. And if you look at these forms, you're going to have the performance declaration, which was new, but now it's no longer new because the last time we updated SBDs, standard bidding document. Every time I mention acronym, I'm looking at Luis's face. The last time we made them, we included past performance. So if you have done one recently, you would recall that you have to now declare if you've had a very bad performance on a project. Declaration in itself does not lead to consideration into evaluation. So let's say you did very badly the last time. We're not going to mark you down for that bad performance. But if you don't tell us, then your bid will be rejected. So non-declaration is the offense. It's not actual declaration. We think it's quite very helpful that you tell us what happened in your last project if it went horribly wrong, so we can engage with you proactively on how to mitigate such recurrence on the current project that you're seeking to sort of secure. And then now we're asking for experience in how you manage EHS. This is very important. And there are a lot of detailed specifications that have now, this was not the case before until we migrated from the Fittich Pink into the Red Book. So these are documents which are available, and if you need them, you can reach out to me. They're publicly available. We can share to them, but I thought I'd just share them with you so that you can see there's a lot of strong emphasis on EHS. Again, the EHS here, let me re-emphasize, it's not just about health and safety. There's environment and there's a social element as well to it. Okay? So under Fittich, issues like fatalities on project site, major incidents, accidents, they're all mandated to keep record of them and also to record them to your development partners, which includes us, and then your employer, who is our borrower or client in this case. I've mentioned this, then but the experience comes in whether you're doing it solely or you're doing it as a JV or joint venture, you still have to mention those ones. There's also the same, so there's no need. Then we come to one that is very important, evaluation. And that's where maybe the new baby on the block, the merit point criteria comes in. At the moment, if a bid is not accompanied by an environmental health and social management plan, it may be rejected. And that's something that you should know, because then the bid will be classified as non-responsive. Okay? The criteria for evaluation of the merit point criteria, repeated, or value for money, is supposed to be non-priced. So what I mean is that when we do the evaluation for the MPC, it's not going to reflect in your financial proposals, because we think people would take that into that and say, let me bid low on that so that I could be able to win a contract. That's not the approach. And I've also explained that the assessment criteria is not like we're giving 25% to this, 25%. All of that will be determined at the strategic procurement stage on a case-by-case basis based upon the procurement risk of the project. Okay? So we have a no objection request on evaluation. Again, I've explained all of this. We can share that to you, so there's no need to worry a lot about that. Now, the employer, who happens to be our client or borrower, also have their own requirement. And these are their requirements. How to manage, again, EHS management, supplementary information regarding the works that you were looking to procure, and then the personnel that you're looking to deploy onto the site. How you sequence those personnel and resource is very important. Many a times we've seen projects that did not plan properly have deployed resources. At times they don't need them, only to find themselves wanting when the resource is needed. So you can have a safeguards expert says you have 6 months person days. That's all. But what it doesn't tell you, when does that 6 months start and when does it end? So they mobilize onto site, they deploy the resource, and then the clock starts ticking. And then when construction work picks up, when you need this person to be going 24/7, the person is run out of person days. That is a lack of planning on your side. And this is where looking into the safeguards management plans for the project is very important, because when you look at it, you will be able to know how long is the construction phase supposed to last? When do I need this resource? And is the allocated person days that has been set by the employer fit for purpose? You can question this at the bidders conference. You can write to the employer and ask for this. It shows your recognition and your expertise and understanding of the project work, right? So I'm going to be moving through all of this. We don't need all of that. Then, bang on, you're going to win the contract, hopefully. You have a contract agreement, and that contract agreement is made up of standard conditions and then some bespoke conditions. Sometimes when we think there are particular conditions of contract, COPA, then we'll work with you on that party and then put those legal covenants within it. And that's also why you need to look at the document carefully, because these things will end up in your contract. So big congratulations, because you've now won the contract. Planning is everything, okay? Failing to plan is planning to fail. So planning is everything. I can't overemphasize that. And Lisa even gave it away. That is one of the easy takeaways. If you fail to plan, you have unintentionally planned to fail on a construction project. And scheduling of resourcing and logistics equipment engagement is very critical. From when you go to lay down, mobilize to the site, to when you do everything. So the next couple of slides you see are all guidances that we're telling you. Prior to when you do this, make sure all of this are done. So you have your contract management plan in place. Prior to contract commencement, have you done all of this? It's very important. Construction stage, have you considered all of this? We don't have time, otherwise I'll go into each of the blocks and tell you exactly what goes in. But I think you guys will know, because you're practitioners. You will know all of this. The last bullet is the one I need, because we've got some acronyms. This is CESMP, which is Construction Environmental and Social Management Plan. The management plans that you have can be split into construction phase and O&M, operation and maintenance phase. This is the construction phase, environmental and social management plan. And it's very important, because each of the tasks and jobs that you do during the construction phase would need to reflect the project level construction management plan. Okay, so all of this, these are good practices that you can have. You have to dovetail it to meet your own local needs. And you could on and on. One thing I want to mention to you has to do with engagement with stakeholders. For a lot of project-affected persons and community members, they only see the project when they see you with your high-vis, shining high-vis, nice, driving your truck and bringing your excavators. This is the time they begin to realize, oh, it's here. And then complaint. So you also need to make sure that before you start bringing your shining high-vis, there is a mechanism on site to address and channel those complaints and deal with them. Education raising, awareness raising. So stakeholder engagement is critically important. Making sure that you are aware of the project level grievance mechanism and how to signpost grievances from affected people to them is important, okay? Delays cost money, and you may not necessarily be entitled to idling charges. Contractors love to pitch in a lot of idling charges if those are not eligible and they are down to your fault. If we have to stop work and then you have contractors, subcontractors, and it's because of your fault, you can't put in anything against idling charges against anybody. And this is not a force majeure eligibility for you even to be calling it. Now we have a progress report, and there's a contract progress report. This is a template that you can use. You can see it splits up into environment, social safeguards, health and safety. It's a template. We can share that with you as well. But this is maybe, I'll say, one of the checklists that you can use to gauge your readiness to start the works. I've been showing you a few others up to now, so you can use this as one of your global checklists. Before construction, during construction, and then maybe construction monitoring. They say it takes a couple to give birth to a child, but it takes a village to raise a child. So what you have in infographic tells you you're one of just component of the jigsaw to implementing that project. But without your contribution, the project will not be implemented. And I think this is where we bring the curtain down for question and answers. Thank you. Any burning questions? and more difficult ones.
Yeah, or share your experience or any insights, comments, thoughts. And we're too early for our coffee break, so you have to talk. There won't be any food if we break for coffee. We're scheduled for a coffee break at 2:30.
Mm.
So please share insights or thoughts, comments.
Have you had any issue with? I saw the challenges with safeguards
Yes.
on the mentee. Maybe we can bring that. Maybe because those are your feedback, and we can look into it and see whether some are ones.
Folks in the back, control room, can you flash the Mentimeter results?
Because it's gonna be a game changer from next year. I hope you are aware. Especially consultants, contractors, if you're here. Yeah, I think the value for money concept or the merit point criteria concept is going to be new. And it's going to maybe change the game a little bit, which is why you see it being talked about here multiple times in different forums. Each of the thematic areas were safeguards, but there is also climate change, there is gender. So sustainability is a very big umbrella, and it brings everybody together. So each of these elements are going to come out with criteria on how that should reflect in their area. So it's going to be a very, very interesting dynamics to show why you won, why he lost, until maybe 6 months or 8 months people get familiar with how it's been done. Right of way, resettlement. So today we didn't do a deeper dive in ESS4, which is land acquisition, because we thought we're going to be meeting with consultants, contractors, and you're not necessarily in charge of implementing right of ways. Right of ways are the sole right of our borrowers and clients, especially for our government. They pay the compensations. They have to make sure you have the right of way to do your work, right? But if you have any issue with right of way, I'm a social safeguard specialist, so you're coming into my comfort zone, I can help you do that. And we'll organize some other sessions which will do deeper dive into right of ways.
Does anyone have experience with right-of-way issues? They wanted to share?
Yes.
I did an audit way back in January last year, but it's under IFC. So I think it's prior to the approval of the airports. And then I think there's a disconnect between, it's good to have the project to be funded by ADB, IFC, and World Bank because we always have these safeguards. The problem lies within the government itself. Like for example, in the Philippines, the audit that I did is about the airport somewhere. I won't kind of specifically. But the right-of-way resettlement is so bad that when you go to the site right now, people doesn't even have the right-of-way. The resettlement were paid so poorly, and then when you go to the resettlement, they don't even have water or electricity. So, and then the farmlands have been destroyed. So that is the reason as well that I came back to the Philippines. So I was working in Australia. So I think for me, the challenge is how can we connect the government to do the same thing? I think that's one thing, especially for the Philippines.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Does someone else want to ask something, or I can respond to that? Okay, brilliant. We're not going to talk at the airport in the Philippines because we all know the airport, but we're not going to talk about it. There is this, whenever we come onto a project, IFC, ADB, we have perception of a higher standard, and then we maintain that standard. So if that project is funded by any of us, then there are policies that need to be met. Now, we come out with a land acquisition resettlement plan. So this project that you're talking about, I'm very much aware there is a land acquisition resettlement plan to it. Now, the challenge is the implementation of that plan relies on national laws. The way you value assets relies on the real estate national law, right? The way you pay for compensation, we have to, because ADB, we're not an enforcing authority that has laws. There's been an argument because you thought there's a bit of a disconnect, right? And maybe let me take it back to, now we don't give 100% and I'm not going to mention the airport, we don't give 100% loans for the project. It doesn't come and say you need airport A, you want 100 million, and we give you 100 million. No. The government contribution to the project is what we call counterpart funding, is to pay for the land acquisition and clear the right of way. And there's been all this topic, very difficult discussions by CSOs and other people who say, why don't we include the funding of the right of way as part of the loan that you get? Okay, we do that on special cases, especially for private sectors and others, but I'll tell you the reason why. Because of opportunism and exploitation. And I can share very bad experiences with you. When we have attempted to factor in compensation payment into the loan agreement, all of a sudden, the proposed right of way for a transport project was just inundated with structures overnight, because the people in the government service knew where the alignment of the road is. And they also inflated the pricing for the assets, so they get windfalls from that. That is not the idea of putting in loans. So there are so many valid reasons why we would want to do that, because we do projects not because of, we're not a commercial bank, we're a development bank. So we would not do a project so people's outcomes and livelihood becomes worse off. In fact, one of our outcomes is that no one should be worse off before project than after project. So what you're saying there is exactly what we don't stand for. But it's because of these weaknesses that we have. So in very, very exceptional cases we do, and especially in what we call FCAS countries, fragile and conflict-affected states, then we do those ones. In some private sector transactions, we do that. But in big infrastructure project like the airport you're talking about, it becomes difficult. Nonetheless, we do follow up. We have a lot of monitoring reports. We do a lot of things to make sure the government is honoring their own commitment in terms of the availability of the funds. And also, we put in no forced evictions. You cannot evict anyone without having paid compensations. But I do recognize the challenges that you're saying about. Very technical. I would want what study? Does someone want to add up to it? Don't worry, we will not say that you did it if you think you know what it is. So we can answer accordingly. Is it the scale? We take a risk-based approach, and whatever assessment you do should be commensurate with the risk. So we don't expect you to have, I have been part of projects that have several appendices. One huge appendix is like a file like this, covers only air quality. Another one like that covers noise. Another one like that covers pollution. Biodiversity is huge that you can't even put together because the infrastructure demands that level of detail of assessment. But if you're doing a relatively small impact project, then you have to do the assessment commensurate with that. And that's we don't want over-design, but more importantly, we also wouldn't want under-design. So the assessment has to be accordingly. But even the ESF is going to be more adaptive in nature because there are a lot of more things that we may commit to be implemented during project implementation if we're not too sure of the risks that we can assess during project processing. So there's adaptive approach. There is a bit more flexibility with the ESF going forward. And that is all to minimize transaction costs, hopefully to the borrower client, but that also cascade to you as consultants and contractors. Okay?
Any other questions before we take a break?
Yeah, I can see.
Come up with more questions.
Hi, so I have a couple of different questions. So my name is Paul Lord. I'm based in the U.S. I've done a lot of work in capacity building and also proposal development and proposal management. So it's been a couple of years since I've worked on ADB proposals specifically. But as you were talking about kind of the financial pieces and incentivizing government agencies and the ministries to do kind of what we want them to do in terms of ESF and everything else. As an example, I just worked on a bid with a different bank that was a 70-30 split technical to financial. And it becomes very difficult working with companies to prioritize writing things into their technical proposal that are more cost heavy when the evaluation is 70-30 versus the much rarer, in my experience, 90-10 or 80-20 split, right? So are there ways that we can, or that ADB is looking to influence the borrowers and how they're structuring these bids so that we can make sure these things are kind of put into place? And I had another question as well, but I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much. That's a very useful question. I thought when you say capacity building, I thought I was going to pinch to Lisa, then you quickly move into procurement. The weightings, and I completely agree with you, the weightings of what goes into the technical proposals and financial, you mentioned consistently 70-30, should be determined at that's why I always explain, at that time, you are not at the table. You don't know what is happening. We're determining this with the borrower and the client. So based upon the risks, when I say risks, not safeguards, procurement risk, but also underlines that is safeguards, we then determine the scale. So it's not always 70-30. I can tell you from some, it's been 60-40. It depends on the nature risk for the project. And if we think those things that will factor into the technical proposals are very, very important, then yeah, you could end up into the territories of 80-90 because we think it's that very important. And be mindful of this. The MPC, the merit point criteria, they're non-priced. This is very important, right? So they will be there to affect the technical evaluation, but they will not be there to affect the pricing, right? So even if it's weighted 70-30, the MPC values indirectly scores the technical higher than what you have in the financial, if you get what I mean. And that's the approach. But there are general framework, but I don't want to give you those percentages because there's a big clause and caveat that is going to be on case-by-case basis, and it's going to be reflective of the complexity and the risk of the project from procurement perspective. Yeah. Yes, and that's what another name we use is value for money, right? How do I get value for money? Because there is a perception, and I hope that's not true, that we've had people, the least bidder getting the contract sometimes ends up having 50% variation in the cost when you bring the person into implementation, and you ask yourself, why so? Why are we having now to do variation to increase the price? Something must have gone wrong. Maybe we've not valued the proposal properly, and that's why we're here. Okay.
So we're going to take a 15-minute break. I know 15 minutes is a little bit short, but please do come back in 15 minutes because we're going to start on time, because we did this session in the morning and we got really delayed because we couldn't get people to come back from the break. So please do come back in 15 minutes and we're going to start on time so we can end on time. Thank you.